It's a very important topic. Okay. So anywhere, anyhow you are doing any coding, or like you are running the code, you are executing your test cases day in, day out, you will face exceptions. So people gets confused, like what is exception, how, why it happens, and there are too many questions with exception. Okay, yeah, like as much as inheritance is my favorite topic, exception is my favorite topic. So like I keep interviewer in my code with this, or if I am the interviewer, I ask these questions. Exception is that huge a topic. So first, with few things you have to understand. So whenever we are writing a code, we are getting red liner error, right? There is a error of red liner. So we say that error has came in my code. So what is an error for you then? Can you define error with your experience?
A mistake happened by the developer. I mean,
Well done.
While writing the code, if any mistake arises, then we can call it as an error, Amita.
Correct. So while writing the code, if any mistake is there in my code, uh, it might be from any user. Okay, don't mention developers. You, even as a tester, you might be writing your scripts. You may have the, so by the user when they are writing the code, if there is any mistake, that would be called error. And error comes which time? Compile time or runtime?
Compile time, Amita.
Compile time.
Correct. Error gives, error comes at compile time, because compiler compiles the code and gets the idea, boss, there is a mistake of your code, please rectify it. There is a semicolon has been missed, there has been a braces missed. 1 second, guys. Okay. So error comes compile time. That means compiler is compiling the code and we are getting some mistake. Okay, there is a mistake in my code and that's how I'm getting it. Cool. An error is notified by the compiler to the user, right? Compiler is notifying you with a red liner. That was, there is a mistake, please rectify it. And if it's a good ID, it will give you the suggestions also, that you have missed a semicolon, put a semicolon. You have missed a braces, put a brace, like that. Now, apart this error, there should be something which can occur at like runtime also. Compile time I got. Compile time I have a error in my code. That's it. Compile time things also may happen, right? What I'm saying, compile time. Compile time things means you are dividing a number by 0. Is it possible? No, right?
No.
You are putting, your array has 5 elements. You are putting an index as 10. Is it possible? No, right? But when you are writing the code, there would not be any error, right? Because compiler doesn't know how many elements are there. Compiler is not going deep, right? How many elements are there in your array. For compiler, it's an array, and you are trying to fetch the data with an index. So for compiler, it's all good. But when you run the code, you get, right, array out, sorry, index out of bound, array index out of bound. So you may have seen this. So while you run the code, then only this comes as a red liner in your console, and that is exception. So the basic difference between error and exception is that error happens compile time and can be rectified. Okay, the term is rectified. For the exception, it happens runtime and can be handled. It's not rectified, can be handled. So again, the basic difference, error happens compile time, exception happens runtime. So anything happens at the moment when we are running the code and all would be called an exception. Exception happens runtime. That's why because it's not possible for the compiler. Like I am dividing a number by 0. For compiler, what is the picture? Okay, boss, I'm dividing one integer by another integer. No issues, right? Nothing wrong in that code. So it's possible. Divisional operator will work. Both integers should work. I have given good semicolon and everything. So no issues. So compiler says all okay, boss, you run the code. You run the code and you get no, boss. You can't divide it. Some, I think, mathematical exception. So you will get an exception that you can't divide a number with 0. And that comes while we are running the code. That means runtime. So as I said, this question is important. Okay, what is an error first and what is an exception? Two individual questions. And third question is, what is the difference between error and exception? Now, okay, I'll share my screen. One second. Visible, right?
Yes, yes.
So we got error, we got exception, we got the difference, all good. Error is compile time, it can be rectified. And for here, it is runtime and it can be handled. What I mean by handled and all, I'll come back to that later. No issues. And now exception. So if we see exception, it's actually like exception is also an, I think, class. Exception is a class. Okay, it is a parent class. On top of it, there are multiple, like it has been inherited by different type of exception, different types of classes. But apart from class, there are two types of exception. Two types. I'm saying the topic. Okay, not the class name. Don't think these arrows are inheritance arrows. Okay, it's just type. One is checked exception. Another is unchecked exception. And if you come to my interview, I'm gonna ask these questions for sure. Checked exceptions and unchecked exceptions. Okay, so I think Pravanna will have some experience with this, but others I'm not sure. But checked exception. What is a checked exception? I just said key exception happens runtime. If you search as checked exception and read any document like different documentation and all, you will see mostly they will say checked exception happens compile time. It's a compile time exception. And then just never read that exception topic from that particular documentation ever again. Okay. Checked exception is not compile time. If exception is runtime, then checked exception is also has to be runtime. If anyone says it's compile time, it's wrong. It's forever wrong.
Okay.
But
Okay, no
what
problem.
happens? Why they are saying, but still people are saying, right? Some documents are saying it's compile time. There must be some reason. So let's see what happens. I'll show you some example of checked exception actually. There is a very famous line. Whoever has done Selenium, they mostly knows it. Once I let it open. Opened. So this is my code, right? So if I give here, okay, this is the line which mostly is the easiest example. This is called thread.slip. What is thread.slip? So you're processing, like Java is a multi-threading language, right? You remember. So what happens whenever this code is getting run? So maybe 1 second, I'll just start the annotation. Just I'm giving a high level view of this. I don't want to put too much here. 1 second, I'm just starting the annotation. Why there are by default lines? What happens? You have written a code. This code will, like your processor has maybe 16 threads. Okay. Like i5 13 generation may have 16 threads. So whatever this process is happening to execute this result, Java will go to a particular thread and execute it. Okay. So Java uses multi-threading, means when you are running parallel, maybe you are running 1000 test cases, you will not run sequential, right? You will run parallelly. So you will use 4 threads and it can execute all these 4 threads are occupied with this execution. okay, of your processor. Threading depends on the processor. So I'm saying thread.sleep. Thread.sleep means after doing this much of code, the thread will stop working for 2 seconds. This 2000 milliseconds, okay? This 2000 milliseconds. If you know 1 milliseconds, someone is doing something on screen. Don't do that. 1 second is, if I start annotation, you guys also will have annotations. So don't do this. So 1 second is 1000 milliseconds. So I have given 2000 milliseconds here, thread.sleep. That means that particular thread would be in pause for 2000 milliseconds, means 2 seconds. And if you see, there is a compile error right here. You guys can see, right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So what happens? Why there is a compile error? And if you hover on it, you will see that it's saying unhandled exception. Type interrupted exception. I'm interrupting the execution, correct? I'm interrupting the thread processing, correct? But just now I said that exception will occur runtime. But here the compiler is giving error that unhandled exception type interrupted exception, correct? And that's why people say that this is the example of checked exception. That checked exception is compile time. Checked exception is compile time. But I say no, checked exception is not compile time. Checked exception is also runtime. What we are getting here is a warning. What I mean, everyone goes to market, right? Every one of us goes to market, and we go to market with a list of the things we need to get, correct?
Yeah.
Like I have a
Yes.
list, I have like a checkbox, I have list. So there is a list present for the compiler also in his mind. For the compiler, boss, you see anywhere somewhere thread is getting stopped, please stop the user or give a warning to user, boss, you may have exception from here, handle it. It's giving me an warning actually. Checked exceptions are the exceptions where compiler is used for the warning to user that, boss, from this line exception may occur, please handle it. That's why it said the unhandled exception, interrupted exception. So compiler was giving me warning, boss, you have used this line, have you handled it? No. That means you have to handle it. Once you handle it, it's gone. How to handle, I can't show you now. That's what I'm saying. Checked exceptions are the exceptions where but why still it's not compile time? Why I'm saying still runtime? So you guys have seen that array index out of bound, right?
Yes,
How many people have seen?
yes, I have seen it.
Yes, yes, Anta. I have seen.
Yes,
Okay.
I have seen.
Index.
So
So
overseas and
correct. So this exception comes in the console first thing after run, correct? It comes with the definition in which line the error has came.
Yeah.
It gives even the line number, and it gives like the exception hierarchy also, like which particular exception has occurred, what is the reason and all. There are some details comes in the red color in the console. Has that happened when I have given thread.sleep? Have you got any exception?
No.
No, right? The
No.
exception,
No.
that's what I'm saying. Exception hasn't occurred yet, but that is a checkbox present to the compiler, boss. There are few types of exception. If user uses any of these type of lines, please give a warning to the user so that the user can handle this. That's why they are called checked exception. That means compiler can check these lines or this particular exceptions even before it happens. That's why they are called checked exceptions. Got the point?
Okay. Okay, Amitabh.
Amitabh,
Yeah.
can you repeat once?
Okay, I will come over again. Exceptions are always runtime. Okay, always runtime. Anyone comes and says checked exceptions is a compile time thing, like it's not true. Okay,
I mean, we
so
should say it as they are identified at compile time.
correct.
Though it
They
is,
are identified. Like it's something like you have a list of market. You are walking through market. If you have a list, instantly you will match. Okay, I need rice. There is a rice shop. Correct.
Right.
I need oil. From that shop, I can get the oil. Correct. It's the same type of thing. There is a checklist you can imagine for the compiler. Boss, if user uses any of this type of processing, I'll give you another example. So you want to get the test data. Just imagine it. I can't show you now. So you want to get the test data from an external Excel file. Okay. You have given the path. You have
Yeah.
given the path. But still you will get an checked exception error from the compiler, boss, because compiler will tell you the file may not be there, right? You have given a path. For compiler, it's okay. There is a file path. I'm happy. But the file actually may not be there. Then your test case will fail. So compiler will by default give you a checked exception. That is file IO exception, file input output exception. That means you are giving a path. There is a chance the file itself is not there. You have given a wrong location. Then the test case will start to fail, right? It is also an example of checked exception. Where a compiler checked exception are those exceptions which hasn't occurred. Okay, it's not occurring in the compile time. The compiler is giving you a warning, this exception may occur from this line, please handle it. That means compiler has seen you have used some of this, like particular file path, any of this particular criteria, and instantly if you haven't handled it properly, so it will ask you, boss, from this line you will get an exception, please handle it. That's why they're called checked exception. Compiler is checking it. That's what is checked exception. Okay,
Okay.
it hasn't
Okay, sir.
occurred. Exception hasn't occurred. If exception has occurred already, then you would have got what is the exception, which particular line is giving this exception, and like what is the exception hierarchy and all. There are multiple things comes when you get an exception. Okay, so this is not an exception. Exception hasn't occurred yet. Checked exceptions are the exceptions which compiler is aware about, and compiler can give you a early warning, boss, there might be an exception coming from this line, please handle it. That's what checked exception is. Checked exceptions are not compile time exception. Anywhere you read it, don't read exception from that site anymore.
Yes, Amitabh, got it.
It's not only for one person, others. Any confusion, like checked exception is going to disturb you like hell. Okay, so I'm saying any doubt.
Yeah, but anyhow, these checked exceptions handle at runtime only, right?
Yeah, like checked exceptions. See, checked exceptions are actually the exception which will not even get the chance to get in the runtime. Okay, it
Yeah.
may have occurred in runtime if you hadn't handled it. If the compiler was not aware about it, and if you run it, you may have got an exception. Just I told you, right? You are importing test data from an Excel file, and your that test data is not there at that particular file path, then you would have got your test case failed, or you have got an exception, right? But before that only, compiler is giving you a warning, boss, there is a chance you might get exception because of this file path. So handle it properly here now, here only. Got it, right?
Yeah, yes, thank you.
But checked exceptions are not compile time exception. I'm saying again, checked exceptions are the exceptions where compiler gives us a warning that from that particular line, it may get an exception. That's why it asks us to handle it. But exception hasn't occurred yet. You are not seeing any exception. You are not seeing any particular uh, like stop of the exception defines. Okay, I forgot to say thing. Exception defines as stop of the execution. Okay, if any problem is there and you are running the code, then due to an exception, the execution will stop. But you haven't started the execution, and there is no stop of the execution also for the checked exception, right? You just wrote the line. It said there is a chance of like getting exception from there, and that's it. It's a compiler giving a warning. That's why they're called checked exception. As I said, you can think of it like the compiler has a checkbox list of it. If any of these particular parameters matches, compiler gives a warning, but this might throw you exception, handle it. It's an early warning sign so that exception doesn't occur later. That's it. That's what checked exception is.
So then it represent like it may have a exception or not, right? Like it hasn't been confirmed. At the runtime level, we could expect these early warning.
Got it. Like I'm not clear. Can you come again?
Like it is just early warning. Like it may happen or may not, right?
No, no, it will happen actually. It will happen. And first of all, like you can't go beyond this because compiler is stopping you with an error. Okay, you have to solve the error. You ignore the compiler and go ahead and run it. It's not possible, right? Because there is an error in your code. That's what like user is stopped even to do it through compiler warning. Compiler warning is you can't ignore, right? If you miss the semicolon, you can't run your code. It will say there is an error in your code. The same thing. So you can't go beyond this point. You have to first fix, and that's it. That's why the compiler comes and gives you early warning that this line will give you an exception. Please handle it. It will give you exception, bro. Okay. So file input output, as you said, there is a chance that okay, I have given the correct path and there is no exception coming. As much as that is true, but still it will come under the checked exception part. So anyhow, compiler is gonna check it.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
But should we be, can we run the code even if it throws the compilation error, Amta?
No.
No.
I mean, okay. I mean, for sure it is throwing it anyway.
Yes. Because it's a checklist. That's what I'm saying. It's a checklist. Anytime, anywhere you use it, it's gonna throw you an error of this. That's why checked
Okay.
exception comes. And because checked exceptions, people say like it's a compile time exception. It's not, because the exception hasn't occurred. You have to make very three things clear. First is checked exceptions are not compile time exception because the exception hasn't occurred in compile time. Second, checked exceptions are the exceptions which compiler gives you a warning that exception will occur from this line, so you have to handle it on priority. Third thing, checked exceptions are also not errors. Okay, it's not an
Okay.
error. It's using error to give you a warning, but it's not an error. It's an exception. You saw that line, right? What is the warning coming?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
exception will occur from this line. That's why it's throwing an error as a warning sign. It's not an error. So that difference also comes, that checked exception, and what is the difference between checked exception and an error? Okay.
Yeah.
So I think you guys can go through once checked exception, only checked exception and error. These three topics. Okay. So what are exception, checked exceptions, and error? These three topics once, and we can discuss again tomorrow. Yeah. I have a meeting to attend, so I'll drop off. Thank you.